Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I'm actually very pleased to rise today, Madam Speaker, to speak to this issue. This is an issue that is near and dear to my heart, and I have some stuff to offer today in terms of how I see where I see some flaws with this motion, quite frankly. But first I want to establish and correct the record, Madam Speaker. I've already heard from both NDP interventions today, both the member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley and Rosemont-Le-Petit-Patrie, who have indicated that the removal of the carbon tax from home heating oil was regional, and that is 100% incorrect. The way that it's done is if you heat with oil and you are currently subject to the federal price on pollution, regardless of where you live in the country, you will not pay the carbon tax. So, for the member from Rosemont-Le-Petit-Patrie and the member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley who said that this is somehow regional, well, I got news for them. There's twice as many people that heat with oil in Ontario than all of Atlantic Canada. So this notion that it is somehow a regional thing, while I hate to say it, but the NDP appears to be just jumping on the bandwagon of a narrative that the Conservatives are trying to set. And it's factually incorrect. And I think it's very important to point that out. And so while I'm on this topic, Madam Speaker, I would like to address the issue of home heating oil and the carbon tax, or the price on pollution that has been removed from that recently. Some call it the carbon tax. And I want people to appreciate why that happened and why that was done in the way that it was done. We know two things about heating with oil. It is the dirtiest form of heating, and it is the most expensive form of heating. Just so that people can understand it from a numbers perspective, in 2023, the annual operating costs in British Columbia, Vancouver, if you heat with natural gas and you have a 96% efficient furnace, you will pay $600 in gas. If you heat with oil in the same country and have a 94% efficient furnace, you will pay $1,800. You will effectively be paying 3 times the amount if you heat with oil. In Calgary, Alberta, it's $800 versus $3,200, 4 times as much. In Regina, Saskatchewan, $1,400 versus $4,400. In Toronto, Ontario, $900 versus $3,400. In Winnipeg, Manitoba, $1,300 versus $4,700. In Montreal, Quebec, $1,300 versus $3,400. In Fredericton, $1,600 versus $3,600. In Halifax, $2,200 versus $3,200. In every single example I've given, I've shown that it is significantly more expensive to heat with oil. And it is the dirtiest form. So, a natural question that environmentalists might have, and I think it's a very good question, because quite frankly, it is a policy that I had to really think about when I heard that it was announced. Why? The question would be, why would you remove the price on pollution from the dirtiest form of heating? And it's a really good question. And actually, if you were to only remove it and stop there, it'd be bad, because you would accomplish nothing. Yep. And you wouldn't be encouraging people to heat with oil because of the price difference, unlike the leader of the opposition who implied in a question during question period last week. But you certainly wouldn't be pushing forward. So our plan is not to remove the price on pollution. It is to pause it for 3 years so that people can use that money that they otherwise would have been spending on the dirtiest form of fuel to transition to a heat pump. So, from an environmentalist perspective, I'm not happy with the idea of removing a tax from the dirtiest form of fossil fuel, but I know that in the long run, we will be better off from an environmental perspective because more people will have transitioned to heat pumps. And this brings me to the second policy that was also adopted that Conservatives and, quite frankly, the NDP like to conflate as well. And that's the issue of heat pumps aren't available throughout the entire country. That's not true. Heat pumps are available through a federal provincial program to the whole country. It is up to the individual province to sign up and to say to the federal government, yes, we want to participate. We will provide X number of dollars, you provide X number of dollars. That's the way the program works, that's the way the program's set up, that's the way the 3 Atlantic provinces who have bought in, signed up for the program, are currently on it. So I want to make absolutely clear, the program is available throughout the entire country, but it is up to the provinces to decide that they want to come on board. Now let me shift to the problem that I have with this motion, Madam Speaker. And the problem was highlighted very early on in the debate by questions that have been coming forward. The problem has been highlighted very early. Oh, and actually there's one more thing I wanted to mention about home heating and oil. Quebec has actually banned oil heating in new homes starting on the 31st of December as of 2023. They banned it. You can't build a house in Quebec that has oil as a form of heating. According to the CBC article from December 31st of 2021, as of December 31st, oil-powered heating is banned on all new construction projects across Quebec. A part of the province's push to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Quebec has always been a leader in this regard. In 2 years, Quebec will go a step further by making it illegal to even replace an existing oil furnace with any sort of heating system powered by fossil fuels. So in 2 years, after December of this year, basically, you have to replace with a non-fossil fuel burning source. Quebec, as a province, is doing the right thing here. They're bringing in bold initiatives that are important, that are going to genuinely transform how people heat in the province. But as I indicated in a question that I asked earlier, over 80% of Quebec already heats with electricity. So this motion is actually unfair to Quebecers, which is why I had asked the question earlier. I was going to ask the question, but it was answered already by the member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley. When I read this motion, and I will read it again for you, Madam Speaker, the motion says that the House call on the government to remove the GST from all forms of home heating. Sounds easy. I'm sure who drafted it made a lot of sense. But you're forgetting the complexities, Madam Speaker, of how people heat their homes. And it's not as cut and dry as somebody has a gas furnace, somebody has an oil boiler, somebody has electric baseboard heating. Well, for example, heating your home with a heat pump is done by electricity. So the question that I had originally when I read this was, okay, well, what about people who use electricity? Now, the member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley answered that question by saying, we will remove, this motion would apply to all forms of heating. Therefore, if you heat with electricity, you don't pay the GST on your electrical bill. So then I'm thinking, okay, so when my kids are playing with their PlayStation or their Xbox, whatever, and they're using electricity, they're not going to be paying GST on that if I happen to be one of the people that also has baseboard heaters. Because now I'm heating with baseboard or an electric forced air furnace. Those are very common too, especially in Quebec. So if somebody uses a forced air electric furnace, presumably, according to this motion, all GST would be removed from their electrical bill. But then how is that fair? Because now the consumption of electricity that's not related to home heating is something that's not subject to GST anymore. So then I'm thinking to myself, okay, the member from Skeena-Bulkley Valley addressed that point too. He said, oh, no, we knew about that when we drafted this. I'm paraphrasing, of course. We knew about that when we drafted this, and we intend this to be on the entire electrical bill. Well then, how is that fair to somebody that heats with gas, but also has an electrical bill? So my gas bill would not have the GST on it, but my electrical bill would because I don't happen to heat with electricity. Unfortunately, Madam Speaker, I think I understand where the NDP is coming from, but in my opinion, with all due respect, this is an extremely flawed motion in the wording. It doesn't achieve what I think that they intended to when they originally wrote this. And so that's why I'm concerned about supporting this. I actually agree with a number of the things in here. I agree that, and I've said this in this House, Madam Speaker, that the oil and gas sector has profited record profits. I brought to the attention of this House during various different debates the fact that the oil and gas sector, as it relates to purchasing gasoline at a gas station for your vehicle, is 9 times the impact, the increase is 9 times what the carbon tax effectively is. So let me explain that. In the preceding year, on the average liter of gasoline in Canada, the carbon tax contributed a 2-cent increase per liter, but the wholesale profits, so the profits made not by the retailer who owns the gas station, but the oil company that is selling it to the retailer, made 18 cents more per liter. So 9 times more of an effect from the price on the profits that are being made versus the carbon tax. Yet conservatives are nowhere on that. They're not 9 times as outraged with the big oil companies. No, not at all. They're picking on the 2 cents per liter when the bigger fish is the 18 cents per liter. But they're silent on it. I wonder why. I think we all know. I really don't have to say it. But my point is that I recognize that. And so I actually think that it is important to do something with respect to the oil and gas sector. Now, does the issue of what the NDP is proposing solve the problem? They're saying take the record profits. Okay, well, how do you do that? Do you do that the way that we did that with the banks? Because the way we did that with the banks and the insurance companies was over a 5-year period. It was set up. It was an established baseline. If you made anything more than that, you had a separate tax level. But that's only for 5 years, and it's only while those profits are high. How does that, I mean, I understand you collect the money and then you reinvest it into environmentally friendly options, which is what they're proposing, but I don't understand the long-term strategy there. I certainly understand the short-term strategy of penalizing them for gouging the market, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, but there's no long-term strategy there. Where I think the better long-term strategy is, quite frankly, in dealing with oil and gas sector, Madam Speaker, is dealing with the sector from capping the emissions that they're allowed to produce. And this is a highly effective and established mechanism for doing it. It's nothing new. And that's why, we set up strategies, Canada's methane strategy, which includes the requirements for the oil and gas sector to achieve methane reductions of at least 75% by 2030 from the 2012 levels. And so we had a position paper that's been done on it. I've submitted so many petitions, well over 20 petitions by this point, Madam Speaker, to this effect. I happen to have another one here because I presented one yesterday. I'll probably present this one tomorrow. But these are Canadians, and this is what Canadians are talking about. They're saying, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has warned us repeatedly that rising temperatures over the next 2 decades will bring widespread devastation and extreme weather. They are concerned and certainly feeling the impacts in Canada today with increased flooding, wildfires, and extreme temperatures. They want to address climate change, and they recognize that this requires a drastic reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius in the oil and gas sector, which is the largest, fastest growing source of emissions. And in 2021, they know that the federal government committed to cap and cut emissions for the oil and gas sector to achieve net zero emissions. So these petitions, and I've presented this on behalf of thousands of Canadians, call on the government of Canada to immediately move forward with bold emissions caps for the oil and gas sector that are comprehensive in scope and realistic in nature in achieving the necessary targets that Canada has set to reduce emissions by 2030. I mean, I think that is a better strategy. We have 2 forms of really pricing pollution. You can do that through a direct price on pollution, what commonly called the carbon tax. And that is done, and people are provided rebates as an incentivization to curb their behavior but still get more money back, which is why 80% of more Canadians that are paying it get more money back. Or you can do the cap and trade model, which is a model that the Western Initiative adopted with a number of states in the United States and a couple provinces, including Canada and Ontario, although Doug Ford has since backed out of it. You know, that's another way that you can do it, through cap and trade. And so by capping the emissions, Madam Speaker, we can start to control what we know is the highest emitting sector and the fastest growing. As a matter of fact, it's the only sector, Madam Speaker, that hasn't started to turn downwards in terms of its graphical representation of its emissions. So I think that it is really important that we develop sound policy. I kind of get where the NDP is coming from. I understand at least their motivation, but I completely disagree with it. I think now is the time to be steadfast in our commitment to the environment, but also find ways to support Canadians. And I don't see how removing the GST from all forms of home heating, notwithstanding the fact that I've already pointed out the flaws in the motion, I don't see how that ends up encouraging people to reduce emissions. That's what the price on pollution is. That's what the Conservatives got the NDP to agree with them to vote on yesterday, which I was really surprised when I saw that. A reporter asked me a question on this, why is the NDP voting in favor of it? And I said, I don't know. I understand that they see people are struggling, because we do too, but we can provide other supports for people. We don't have to rely on, this narrative that the Conservative leader has created. There are ways that we can deal with helping people that don't have to be at the expense of the environment. And so I will conclude, Madam Speaker, by saying that although, I appreciate where they're coming from, I think that this motion is highly flawed. I think it creates a lot of questions. I think that those questions create a lot of inequality. And I think that it would be much better served for us to find ways to support people. And by the way, I just want to throw this out there for my NDP colleagues. You basically called on Galen Weston's house to not pay GST on home heating. Are they aware of that, Madam Speaker? Are they aware of the fact that this motion basically says Galen Weston doesn't pay tax GST on his home heating? I don't think that's what Conservatives, or that's what NDP had in their head when they created this. But unfortunately, this motion is creating a lot of problems. And we would be better off, and I actually think that nobody knows this better than the NDP, we would be better off targeting our supports at those who really need it and not those who don't. Hear, hear. Myself, Galen Weston, other people who are able to afford the cost of heating. And so I would encourage my NDP colleagues to really give it some thought. I understand where they're coming from, but unfortunately I think that this was extremely flawed in its execution. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Well said.